And there we go.
All right, great. Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome to the May 6th Ordinance Review Committee meeting. I will call the meeting to order, and I guess we should start with a roll call.
Yep. Mr. Veliver.
Here.
Mr. Talbot.
Here.
Mr. Walsh, we have
Here.
a quorum.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, excellent. Well, thank you all very much. I think what we, it's been a while, and this. So hopefully we've got a few things on the agenda today that we're going to try to pick up on and really start moving on, especially the unsafe premises / potential blight ordinance, and then talk a little bit about Public Building Commission, which has been sitting there, and also Park and Rec Commission, and then also. Although probably not move much on it today, I just wanted to bring it back up because it is on our list of items that have been referred to us to the possibility of increasing income limits for veterans tax relief, which like we've been doing for the elderly. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jeff, our town attorney, and he is going to give us his thoughts on the possibility and how we can move forward with a blight ordinance, what we can put together, what we can have, and how we can do this in a way that's enforceable and manageable. So, Jeff, if you could start us off with that, that'd be great.
Sure. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. So when we talk about the blight ordinance, possibility of a blight ordinance, what we're talking about is pursuant to Connecticut General Statute 7-148, subsection C7H15. Okay. Now, the reason there's so many subsections is 7-148 of the general statutes is the part of the general statutes that sets forth municipal powers. So there's quite an extensive list of the municipal powers. And one of those is to make and enforce regulations for the prevention and remediation of blight, including regulations reducing assessments and authorizing designated agents of the municipality to enter the property during reasonable hours for the purpose of remediating blighted conditions, provided that those regulations define blight and require such municipality to give written notice of any violation to the owner and occupant of the property, and provide a reasonable opportunity for the owner and occupant to remediate the blighted conditions prior to any enforcement action being taken, and further provided that the regulations do not authorize the municipality to enter anyone's house or any structure on the property without their permission, and including regulations establishing a duty to maintain the property and specifying standards to determine if there's neglect. And the statute also provides for civil penalties for the violation of the regulations of not less than $10 or more than $100 for each day that a violation continues. And municipalities are required to adopt a citation hearing procedure in accordance with section 7-152C of the general statutes. So in terms of what provisions are required in a blight ordinance based on the statute that I just summarized for you, there's basically 5 requirements, if you will. The first is it's very important to define blighted conditions. And when defining blighted conditions, it's important to make sure that they don't conflict with any definitions or provisions in the town's zoning regulations. For example, many blight ordinances will regulate unregistered vehicles or outside storage, for example. And it's typical for zoning regulations, as do Cheshire's, to likewise have regulations pertinent to unregistered vehicles and outside storage. So in defining blight, you want to be as specific as possible, not only because failure to be specific could subject the ordinance to legal challenge, but also because the idea behind the blight ordinance is to obtain compliance. And in order for people to know what it is they need to do, the ordinance needs to be very specific. The second requirement of the ordinance is that it must require the town to provide written notice of a violation to the property's owner and occupant. That's pretty obvious, right? The third is that the ordinance must provide the owner and occupant with a reasonable opportunity to remediate the conditions before any enforcement action is taken. The fourth requirement is to establish a citation hearing procedure. And I referenced from the enabling statute 7-148 C7H15, the reference to the hearing procedure set forth in 7-152C. And 7-152C basically says that the chief executive officer of the town has to appoint one or more citation hearing officers other than police officers or employees who issue citations to conduct hearings authorized by that section. So there's no need for a board or a commission. You can simply appoint an individual to perform the hearings, but that individual cannot be the same individual who issues the citations. And as I mentioned, when I read the statute, the fine, which of course is not the purpose of it, the fine is an incentive to encourage the property owner and occupant to comply, can be between $10 and $100 a day for each day that a blight violation continues. And then the final, not really a requirement, but component of a blight ordinance would be if you intend to have a special assessment for blighted properties, you need to provide standards for the imposition of an assessment. And I don't get the sense that that's something that you're looking to do. It's a very involved process that includes a committee of not less than 6 taxpayers, one of whom is a landlord, the tax assessor, representatives of the agencies responsible for zoning, health, housing, fire, and other safety code compliance. So for our purposes, we're really focused, at least that's my sense so far, on the first 4 components. Other things to think about, other than the basics that I just articulated, there's a whole laundry list of possibilities in terms of considerations that are intertwined with a blight ordinance. One, for example, is Town of Cheshire has an ordinance currently, Ordinance 17-10, which allows the building official to withhold permits if taxes are due. One thing that you would consider if you went forward with a blight ordinance would be possibly giving the building official discretion to waive that requirement if it's in connection with remediation of a blighted property. Okay. Another couple of considerations for you. When we talk about a blight ordinance, we want to keep in mind the purpose. Okay. And most blight ordinances do. I'm sure I looked at your meeting minutes and I know that you've looked at a variety of other towns' blight ordinances, Farmington, North Haven, for example. And you'll see that they have a declaration of purpose. And the purpose commonly is referred to as correcting existing blight, promoting public health and safety and welfare, and preserving property values. In fact, the statute that I read to you from 7-148, the Municipal Powers Statute, the enabling legislation that allows municipalities to adopt blight ordinances is under the public health section of the Municipal Powers Statute. The scope of the ordinance can be as broad or as narrow as you would like it to be. Most of the ordinances cover any building, any structure, any parcel. However, some have more narrow applicability. For example, the town of Wethersfield has an ordinance that exempts buildings, structures, and parcels associated with active farms and historic barns. And Torrington exempts owner-occupied 1- and 2-family residences. Likewise, when we talk about definitions, there's a lot of latitude in terms of how you want to set the ordinance up. Most ordinances define blighted premises and blighted conditions broadly, and lists several conditions that constitute blight. Common conditions that are used in a blighted premises definition include broken windows, overgrown grass, rodent infestations, conditions that attract illegal activity, conditions that interfere with a neighbor's use and enjoyment of their property. Some ordinances, however, contain provisions that are applicable to their specific characteristics. For example, the town of Coventry has an ordinance that exempts premises in their natural field or wooded state from the definition of blighted premises. In terms of the obligations that are put upon property owners and occupants under a blight ordinance, blight ordinances typically prohibit property owners from allowing, creating, maintaining, or causing to be created or maintained blighted premises. Some ordinances, not to pick on Coventry and Weathersfield, but I'll use theirs as another example again, make their provisions enforceable against a person who occupies a property, such as a tenant, a non-owner that's in possession of their property, while others differentiate between owners and non-owners in possession. Middletown, for example, their ordinance provides that an owner is solely responsible for structural maintenance, but an occupier, non-owner occupier, is responsible for keeping a premises exterior free from abandoned vehicles, nuisances, garbage, refuse, infestations, and filth. On the complaint side of things, there's a variety of options. Under most ordinances, anyone can file a complaint with the municipality alleging a blight ordinance violation. If the municipality determines that a violation exists after investigating the complaint, as I told you when I read to you from the statute, you're required to give written notice of the violation to the property owner. And if you make it applicable to non-owner occupants, likewise to the non-owner occupant, and provide them with a reasonable opportunity to remediate the conditions before issuing a citation. You can be as specific as you want in terms of defining what constitutes a reasonable opportunity. Hartford and Fairfield, for example, give 30 days. Woodbridge gives 10 days. Others, like Coventry and Weathersfield, set the deadlines on a case-by-case basis. An owner, or if you make it applicable to occupants, an occupant who doesn't remediate the blighted conditions by whatever deadline you choose may be cited and fined. Most municipalities assess the maximum $100 per day fine. In some municipalities, such as Hartford, a property owner may be fined separately for each blighted condition. So you end up with more than $100 per day because you're citing based on each blighted condition. And if the property has multiple blighted conditions, obviously the fines can mount pretty quickly. Most municipalities, by and large, allow enforcement officials to issue citations without a legislative body's approval. Some municipalities, such as the city of Derby, have an enforcement official create a list of blighted properties, which goes to the legislative body for approval before they can take any citation action against those properties. In terms of remediation, if there are attempts made to obtain compliance from a property owner or non-owner occupant, and those attempts are unsuccessful and the municipality incurs costs in remediating the property, Connecticut law allows municipalities to recover from the property owner the costs incurred in remedying the blight on the property. The costs that we typically see include inspection, repair, demolition, maintenance, disposal costs. And after the costs are incurred and demand is made and no payment is made, by statute, the municipality can record a lien against the property, and the lien is a priority lien, second only to delinquent tax liens, municipal tax liens. So that's kind of a broad brush There's some other provisions when you look at different ordinances around the state. There's some other provisions beyond the core provisions that I just talked to you about. And I would basically categorize them three ways. First, there's remediation incentives. In other words, some ordinances provide financial incentives to purchasers who remediate a blighted property with outstanding fines or liens. The city of Bridgeport, for example, allows fines and liens to be waived and released if the city determines at the time of the sale of a property that the buyer can afford to and intends to immediately rehabilitate the property. If the remediation doesn't occur, there's a clawback so that the fines and liens can be reinstated. Along the same lines, in the city of Danbury, purchasers can apply to the city for a waiver of fines and a release of the lien if they agree in a written document to remediate the blight. And, so remediation incentives, even though there's not a lot of ordinances in Connecticut that contain similar provisions, there are opportunities, and it's certainly appropriate for you to consider that. The second category of what I would consider to be non-core provisions are hardship waivers. Some ordinances provide a hardship waiver for elderly individuals, for individuals with disabilities, and/or for low-income individuals. For example, in Coventry, an enforcement officer can give a property owner additional time to correct a violation if the owner establishes good cause, which under their regulation includes an elderly individual, an individual with a disability unable to correct a problem due to a medical condition, or a low-income individual unable to financially afford the cost of remediation. If that's something that you're interested in including in your ordinance, my recommendation would be to have criteria upon which the enforcement officer can determine whether additional time is warranted. Some of the criteria that you would consider would be things like whether other occupants of the structure of the home are able to assist in correcting the problem. And of course, if the problem is so severe that additional time is a bad idea, it's not warranted, it's a public health and safety issue, regardless of the unfortunate circumstances that the homeowner or occupant may be living under, it may well be that waiting is a bad idea. And of course, there's varying, I'm sure you can appreciate and understand, varying levels of blight. If you're talking about a lawn or shrub maintenance issue versus a fire or safety hazard, you're going to have different considerations based on the nature and urgency of the blight situation. And then the third, what I'm calling non-core category of non-core provisions would be special assessments. And like I told you before, very few municipalities have gone down the path of special assessments on blighted properties. It's a very, very, I won't say convoluted, but complex process. Bridgeport and Hartford, obviously different large cities in comparison to towns like Cheshire, have special assessment and very specific standards about their ability to enter a blighted property, to remediate it, and impose a special assessment. And like I said, there's a board that has to be established in order to administer the provisions under that statute. So I think I've been talking for about 20 minutes and kind of flying through it. So let me take a pause and give you guys a chance to ask any questions or say anything that may be on your minds.
Yeah, Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Attorney D'Onofrio. That very helpful information. Some of which, like you said, you've been reading our minutes, so we've been pursuing this for what seems like forever. But so a couple quick questions based on the stuff that you presented. The fine, is there Can you impose sliding scale fines based on, the severity or the nature? And, for example, an uncut lawn is a $10 fine, but a house that's left open to the elements is a $100 fine.
Sure.
Or does that create an issue that where you have different levels? Is it easier to just do here is the fine for an occurrence of blight?
Yeah, my recommendation would be to just go with the $100 a day per violation fine. There's nothing in the law that prohibits you from having a sliding scale, but that requires the hearing officer and the enforcement officer to exercise some discretion in determining which level of fine should be applicable, and probably creates a lot more activity from an administrative perspective than you may want.
Do you have language for the definition of blight that you already have in place, or is there a lack of a better term, a boilerplate or something that we can pull from
Sure.
some other communities that would be similar, that you think would be applicable to our town?
Absolutely.
And then finally, my last question about time for remediation. I think I heard you say that again, that is, can be determined by the town. So you could say it's 10 days or 30 days or 60 days or whatever. We have some properties that have been in this position for quite some time now. So for us to, allow them a 30 or 60 day, to me is, they've had plenty of opportunity, and they know these properties are on our radar. So is there an ability then to take existing properties that have come up under the unsafe premise ordinance to have a 10-day, while anything that is a new occurrence or a new complaint, I guess is a better way to describe it, would have a 30-day or something that we determine?
I think what you should consider doing is having a standard compliance period, whether it's 10 days, 15, 20, whatever you choose, but then have a provision that says, unless in the discretion of the enforcement officer, more prompt remediation is warranted. So you give the enforcement officer the opportunity to consider all of the facts and circumstances, such as how long the violation has been in place, how serious the violation is, and any other factors that merit consideration, so that the enforcement officer, if necessary, can require a more expedited compliance period. Because I think it's a little bit difficult to try to impose, based on the existing unsafe structure ordinance,
Right.
obligations on a property owner, because then you would be saying, hey, blight enforcement officer, you have to assume that there was a violation of this other pre-existing ordinance that already went unabated. So I think it's, it probably makes it a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. And you would probably be better served if whatever time period, you're going to want to, you're going to want to give the hearing officer the enforcement officer some discretion, because there's going to be circumstances where it's just egregious and we can't afford to wait, whatever, even if it's 10 days. It's a balance, as you can appreciate. On the one hand, the whole goal is compliance. If we don't give enough time, it's not reasonable. You know, if we gave somebody 2 days, man, I don't know about you. I've been trying to get a contractor to come to, I'm a construction lawyer. I've been trying to get a contractor to come to my house for 3 weeks because I have a tiny bit of wood rot on an overhang in the back of my house. And maybe it's not a big enough job to interest them, but you know, for the types of blight remediation that we're talking about, it could really run the gamut. You know, it could be grass that's a foot tall, or it could be a hole in a roof. You know, who knows, right? I mean, there's all different types of blighted conditions. So I think that the key is that the enforcement officer have the ability to look at a condition and say, based on the gravity, based on the impact on the neighbors, based on the impact on public health and safety, based on what's best for the occupant, you know, and it's also a scenario where, you know, you could have a house full of kids, right? And you could have some blighted condition that makes it dangerous for the kids to be in the house. So I think, not to belabor the point, but I think it'd be good to have some standard response time, because that would be kind of a baseline. And then we would deviate, you know, give them more time if the condition isn't that serious. And maybe if they're elderly or have a medical condition or a financial challenge, and less time if they don't have any of those issues that would merit longer, but it's a more serious condition.
So, and I guess the follow-up then is it better to just have 30 days, just to pick a number out of the air for right now, as the remediation time, because then it makes it less subject to the discretion of an individual. So somebody could say, well, the hearing officer, you know, gave me 10 days and they gave someone else 30 days, and you know, so they're picking on me or whatever. Does it affect the appeals process or the chance that you would potentially lose in a lawsuit?
Well, it's a very good point. I'm not worried about the lawsuit part of it. I think the appeals process, it does, whoever the council would appoint as the hearing officer to hear appeals, it does kind of set them up for having to consider and weigh evidence of deviation from the standard compliance period. Because like you said, you know, if I get 10 days and you get 30, and I go to the hearing officer and say, why did he get 30? That requires the enforcement officer to put in evidence of the other case to show why it merited the longer time period, which, you know, it's not the end of the world to have to do that, because if it's merited, it's merited. I mean, that's the reality, is there's going to be situations that demand immediate action. And let's keep in mind that the blight ordinance isn't the only tool, right? I mean, there's fire code issues, there's health department issues, there's other enforcement vehicles depending upon how serious the situation may be. So the blight ordinance is, you know, the unsafe structure ordinance that you have does not cover blighted conditions. You know, and the minutes that I read from the, I think it was December 28th ordinance committee meeting, the fire department, the fire marshal provided some discussion about blighted issues that he sees on properties, including furniture and piles of debris. And there's no criteria for blight. He can't act on a call for blighted property because this type of condition isn't covered under the unsafe structures and premises ordinance. So, you know, the reality is that, you know, while there's other tools that you can utilize to deal with the very severe situations, you really don't have anything right now to deal with blight.
So what is it that you need from us, and what is a reasonable time frame? I am very anxious to move this along as quickly as possible to a conclusion. There are properties sitting out there that we should have been collecting fines on for up to 2 years in some cases. Some of these places we may own by now if it wasn't for the fact that, we didn't have something in place. So what do you need from us, and what's a reasonable time frame to send something to the full council?
Well, there's two different routes that we can take. One would be for us to go ahead and draft what we consider to be an appropriate blight ordinance for your review and bring it to the next committee meeting, and then get any feedback and edits and modifications before you send it to the full council. The other would be for you to give me some direction based on some of the, not bells and whistles, but, there's core provisions and there's non-core provisions. Give me some guidance about, what appeals to you and what you'd like to see. And then I could produce a draft. I mean, there's no reason why we can't get you a draft within 30 days.
Excellent.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So thank you, Peter. And that, I think, Don, you had some questions?
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to agree with Peter. I want to move this thing as fast as possible because it's we've all heard from residents in this town about how terrible some properties look, how dangerous some of these properties look, and I think we need to move on that. My question, when somebody pulls a building permit, they have a set amount of time for that building permit, but then the house is left with, house wrap or scaffolding, and sometimes it's been there not weeks or months, years, tarps over roofs for years. I think, and I don't know if that falls under the zoning department because, I'm assuming that a building permit is only good for so long. And if they don't finish that part, they have to keep getting another building permit. And if they're not doing that, then who enforces that? Does that fall under zoning, or will that fall under something in terms of blight?
Well, that's a great question, Don, because it really comes down to whether or not a certificate of occupancy is issued.
Mm-hmm. Well, people
Okay.
I know several where people are still living in the house while they're doing this work, but.
Well, if they're living in the house without a certificate of occupancy, that's a building code violation.
Okay.
Okay, so we would send the building official, and if necessary, get the state's attorney involved.
Okay. The other thing I'd like to see in it is, in terms of vehicles, whether it's motor vehicles or, cars or boats, or, where I think in the unsafe premises we had, they were only allowed so many they had to be registered vehicles. And if they weren't registered, then it wasn't part of the code. But I think, we don't want, to become used car lots in neighborhoods or used boat lots in neighborhoods either. So I would like to see something along that lines as well, if we could put that in there too.
Are you talking about unregistered cars or just
Yes.
cars in general?
No. I mean, if they're registered, there's not much you can do. But if they're unregistered and they're, they just they've been there for years, trying to sell it or whatever they're trying to do on their front lawn, it gets to a point where, how long should they be left there?
Right. Well, that's a perfect intersection with the zoning regs, because although it's something that's regulated under the zoning regs, the ability to issue citations and fines under a blight ordinance is superior to the process under the zoning regs. Because under the zoning regs, the zoning enforcement officer issues a cease and desist order. If the cars don't get removed, then a lawsuit has to be filed in Superior Court seeking an injunction to force the removal of the cars. And then you go back, the cars are gone one day, they're back the next, and you go round and round and you run back to court. But with the ability to levy the fine and record it as a priority lien, second only to municipal real estate taxes, it gives you a real tool to clean that up.
So the blight ordinance would help that, something like that, versus just okay.
Yep.
So I would like to see something like that put in there, but that's all I have for now.
Excellent. Arnett?
I have a question. Can the blight ordinance be more restrictive than the zoning regs?
In what respect?
So if the zoning regs say you can have you can have registered cars, no more than 2 unregistered cars on your property.
Yep.
And if the blight ordinance limit you to 1
No.
unregistered car?
No.
Okay.
No, because it's not blight if it's permitted by the zoning regs.
Okay. Yep. Makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, I appreciate that presentation. A couple comments I have is one that I think I'll echo Peter and Don's sentiments here as far as trying to move this along. I know between COVID and the transition, we've had a little bit of delay, but I feel very confident, not only from our discussions, but also from this presentation here, that you're in a good position to move forward with creating a draft for us to create something that we can really work on. We've been working off multiple regulations from different municipalities and thinking about, okay, well, we kind of like this part from this town and that part from this town, but until we actually pull them together, I think, and get them all in one document, that's really what's going to help us pull it together. And one of the questions I had asked you was, which was very helpful, was, I had looked at North Haven's regulations, but obviously other ones as well. And there's parts of North Haven that I really like, but one of the things that, I had raised some concerns about was, that it had that, that board, that you had to create this whole big board and all those things. And it's nice to hear that you've confirmed that you can have something more simple and streamlined, having one blight officer who can, issue those citations and take those considerations. So I think that's going to be a good factor for us to put into that. And if you can just address a little bit, because I know Don and Peter, we've heard these discussions too about, well, this is going to be used to weaponize neighbors against neighbors and those types of things. Can you just sort of touch a little bit on your experience in managing some of these blight regulations in other towns like North Haven and other places you represented, and how that works? Well,
unfortunately, from time to time, we do see that. We do see that, especially in the beginning of the process after an ordinance is enacted, you do have some, neighbors that have been frustrated with blight. And you do see sometimes complaints from people, that don't rise to the level of blight. But, the investigation is done. And if the enforcement officer determines that the condition doesn't meet the definition of blight, then there's no citation issued. I've seen it in other towns that have blight ordinances that we represent, but I wouldn't say that it's widespread or it's common. There may be 1 or 2 a year where you get you unfortunately, in 31 years as a municipal lawyer, we've seen a lot of times when there's personality conflicts or neighbors that have unfortunate interactions with one another, they spill over into the town attorney's office, and we sometimes try to avoid getting dragged in, whether it's a fence, a tree, a sign, a light shining in somebody's house at night.
Yeah.
So, we really try to, the taxpayers are our customers, and when they come to us with a problem, we take it every problem at face value and investigate it and do our due diligence and determine, just because if it's blight, the motivation of the complaint shouldn't matter. It's blight or it's not blight. And if it's not blight and somebody is making a complaint and the enforcement officer investigates it and finds that it's not blight, they may be an unhappy complainant. So that's something that you have to deal with. But like I said, I don't find it to be I don't find the malice to be by any stretch widespread or common or typical. I think there's always going to be a couple per year, but that's just the way it is, whether you have a blight ordinance or not.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, I appreciate your presentation on this and discussion. I think this has been very helpful to us. And I know we've got a couple other topics and we got to wrap up by 6:30. So I wanted to move on to those. But before I go, Don or Peter, any other last comments you have on this? And then if not, then I will also ask, Jeff, what's the best way? What's the best way, if we have ideas for things that we want to see in this ordinance, what's the best way to do it? Wait until you've sent us a draft, or send ideas maybe through our net to you with our ideas of what things that we want to see in this? Probably, and so I just want to find out for you what the best way is for us to get our ideas to you, because I'm sure that we have ideas and what things might want to be in there, and so we might as well try to get those incorporated up front if we can. So
yeah, I mean, I'm happy to defer to your preference, but certainly if we knew before we began drafting that there were items beyond the core, because what we would do is draft a pretty basic ordinance that covers the framework that I talked about. But for example, if you know that you want to give additional time, for example, to folks, that are elderly or low income or have, medical conditions or disabilities, if we know that up front, then we'll include that. So, certainly if you can send our net, if there's, Councilmember Walsh indicated that, unregistered vehicles are something that he's particularly interested in. So I made note of that. So, if you can send our net any particulars that you want to make sure are covered in the first draft, that would be great.
okay, perfect. Thank you, guys.
And then I guess one last question. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
Because you brought it up about the elderly or people are not able to do it. We're not saying that we're going to say that they don't have to clean up the blight. We're looking to give them more time and opportunity to get it taken care of, versus saying, oh, don't worry about it, leave it. Am I correct on that? We're just going to.
That's exactly right.
Okay. I just want to make sure that was clarified. Yeah.
It's just a question of whether or not you want the enforcement officer to have discretion to give people additional time if they have special circumstances.
Yeah, no, I don't have a problem with that at all. Yeah.
Right.
I think that's perfect. Okay, Jeff, well, thank you very much. And with that, we will move on to the discussion of the Public Building Commission ordinance. And we want to turn this over to, Arnett and I had a little bit of discussion about this. And Arnett, did you have any thoughts on that and how you thought maybe this might be, some ideas on how we can maybe carve this down from the multi-page ordinance that it is down to a much shorter thing where the council really has more discretion and can really do it by resolution rather than ordinance?
That's exactly it, Mr. Chairman. We've had several meetings over many years, and the preference over the last year or so, the last couple of meetings and the last discussions we've had have been that the PBC ordinance is detailed and a bit onerous and requires a lot of steps. I think there's, I don't know, George would know, you have to go back to the council, 5 times, 6 times. And the theory was that we could still have an ordinance that obviously was involved PBC, but enabled the council to set the criteria for the projects when they're referred to the PBC. So if the PBC is if a project's being referred to the PBC and it's a new school and it's a huge project, although we probably have a separate building commission, but if it's a huge project, then the council can by resolution say, well, this project, the council wants to retain the ability to authorize going to bid and to authorize hiring of a contractor and that sort of thing. Whereas if you have a boiler replacement project that may just be referred to staff, that the project is referred and it doesn't need to come back to council. So the council will have a little bit more work in crafting the resolutions to determine how involved they want the PBC to be, but it also gives council control over the process and a method to streamline things that don't need that much process.
Right. I mean, I think thank you, Arnett. And I think one of the things that we've had issues with is, even on small projects, we have to follow that ordinance going back and forth with all these times. And it makes a project that could probably be addressed in a month or two end up being 5 or 6 because you got to wait for another council meeting to approve this and go on from that. So I guess, Don or Peter, do you have any questions on that one at all? Or I mean, I think we've talked about this at prior meetings, and I think now would be a good time for us to try to see if Jeff could pare that down to a paragraph or two.
Well,
Mr. Chair, the only thing I'd say is that I know Arnett and George and I think we've been around too long. This is probably the 3rd time we've worked on rewriting this ordinance. So
right,
it's been 18 years.
Yep.
anything to streamline and make it easier. And I think Arnett hit on it, that if we do it in the resolution itself, it'll make it easier to delineate what happens with the project, and won't have to, or determine the amount of intervention the town council has to have on it.
Right, I agree. And George, did you have anything to add on that?
Nothing other than I heartily concur with everything Arnett and Peter have said, and you too, Mr. Chairman.
Gotcha. Perfect. Don, anything?
I just want to agree. I mean, I think we've discussed this during council meetings where it's taken a long time going back and forth. And with the way, lumber costs are going now, if we had anything going on now, this could have cost this town a lot of money. So we need to figure out a way to streamline this.
Absolutely. So, I guess that's something I will also add to your plate, Attorney D'Onofrio, as far as, trying to streamline that ordinance down to one that gives the council more discretion and not have to deal with all these timetables going forward.
Yeah, I took a look at it, Mr. Chairman. I took a look at it in preparation for the meeting. And the first page has membership and various qualification, powers and duties. That's all fine. But in terms of the responsibilities and limitations, I think the one question I have is, there's no question that we could cut this at least in half. But one question I have is, does the council want the PBC to come to it at the end of schematic design, prior to design development, at the end of design development, prior to construction documents, at the end of construction documents, prior to going out to bid? That's really the question that I have, is at the end of each design phase, does the council want the PBC to come and get the council's blessing before proceeding with the next phase of a project?
Right, and I think maybe that's a discussion we're going to have as far as, but my question is whether that's something that we could do in an order by resolution, and that in that resolution say, at stage 1, 2, and 3, we need you to come back here, but we don't need you to come back at stage, come back at stage 1, but not stage 2 and 3.
Right.
So I guess that's sort of where, right, there are definitely times where under the ordinance where we have to come back. The question is, can we get to a point where we can set out a resolution that says, at these points, the council can determine whether it wants to come back or not, and that those things can be set by resolution and set out in the resolution, rather than the ordinance setting out at this stage, at this stage, at this stage. You have to.
No problem. That's very doable.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And before we move on, Arnett, Peter, anything else on that one? And I guess the question, Jeff, is that something? I mean, not like this isn't like 18 years in the making, but like everything else, obviously, as soon as you get a chance for that, let us know, and we can bring it back here and try to move this ball forward because we do obviously have some projects that are coming forward, and obviously to the extent that we could streamline these for any of those projects, the sooner we can streamline those projects, the better.
Yeah, I'll get something to Arnett. I'll get a proposed draft next week.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, thank you. And we're going to move on now to the Park and Recs Commission ordinance and their proposed changes. With us, we have John Gawlak with us for that. Oh, and Elizabeth Main, thank you. Welcome back. And so, this is another ordinance that has been out there that we would like to look at. And so, Peter and Don, do you have copies of that ordinance? I wasn't sure if you.
Yeah, I've got the ones that Arnett emailed to us.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
I have those.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure. So, John, I mean, I went through some of those, but I think, maybe I'll turn it over to you and or Elizabeth and see what you guys, what your thoughts are on this and where you think the big issues are. And I know that through it, there's question marks, there's ideas, there's thoughts, and how you think some of this might play out. So, you're still muted, John.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having us. So when I first was hired, after I got my feet on the ground a little bit, I did take a look at everything. And one of them was the ordinances. And I had an opportunity in Wallingford when I was there as a director for 16 years. In 2009, I worked with then Corporation Counsel Adam Manzares to update similar ordinances that were over 20 years old to bring them to the present. So in doing so, and then, for my first review was taking a look at the ordinances, and the last time the majority of them were enacted was in 1995. And when you do go through them, some of the language is dated. There's things that are new, some things that we that probably should be in there. So I just took a few months and took a look at Wallingford's on some of the different topics and subjects, pulled some language over, made some recommendations, sat with Dr. Pat Duffy, who, by the way, wishes that he could have been here tonight, but he's celebrating his 48th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
But he does want to be a part of the process at some point. So that we took a look at it, then we brought it to our full commission, presented I think over a period of 2 meetings to give the commission an opportunity to digest it, make some edits or suggestions. There were few, so we did take those. I did give Elizabeth in my office, because of her history with the town and the department, an opportunity to take a look at it as well, provide any comments or feedback, edits, and then just put together, the document that you have with some red line things. And then the things that are highlighted in yellow were just some things that I didn't know how this process was going to play out, that maybe we had a discussion about those things that were open, some subjects maybe that I need a little bit more information on. So I'm here we could either go through it all. It's been a while since I've taken a look at this, because it was back in late fall. But I'm not sure where you wanted to go. Then the other final piece of this also was the open space. There's an open space piece that talks about the Park and Rec Department kind of being the point person, and kind of being the chief overseer of open space. But then through discussions with the town manager's office and Bill Volker, I think by job description, the open space oversight piece really sits with Suzanne Simone. So that was an opportunity. Dr. Pat and I did not touch the open space issue. Again, not knowing what the process was going to be, if it was going to be a workshop or a give and take, or working with the town attorney, talking about the language, and I'm open to anything, really. I just was more interested in bringing these ordinances up to date and if there's any signage or any fines or anything else that we need to include in our parks, this was a good time to do that.
David, you're on mute now.
Yeah, no one's ever heard that on a Zoom call before, right? So are you talking about I know you may not have it in front of you, but the Article 2, the open space lands, which starts are like Articles 11-30.
Yeah, it's way
Yes.
down near the end.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a whole section there, definition, rules. It looks like, Article 2, open space lands.
Okay.
We just basically stopped just before that.
Right. Okay. And that's where I thought you were. I just wanted to make sure. So, I mean, obviously, there's plenty of stuff up to that point, even before that point in these proposals. I think that are helpful. I guess one question I have is: are you right? Just out of curiosity, the definition of department means the Department of Parks and Recreation. Is that still the official name?
Good question. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, the official name of your department, John, is Recreation, according to the identifiers in the budget book. I'm looking at the ordinance too.
But then we also schedule, manage, and make recommendations to parks. So it's
yes. There's a relationship there. I did also want to add we are required to have an open space steward, and it is also required in our land management plans. As John indicated, there was an appointment of the open space steward to be the environmental planner was appointed by job description. That's something that can be changed. And if we're really looking at this ordinance and the operations of the integrating the recreation department and the parks department work, we may want to take a look at that appointment as well.
Okay. So, John, is that what you're saying? That right now she's by job description she's appointed as the sort of steward of those open spaces. But I guess Arnett's saying it could, if this is something you want under these regulations, I guess that's a possibility of shifting that to you for that purpose as well.
I just want to be clear. If it's with Suzanne and it stays with Suzanne, that's perfectly fine by me. I just don't. I want to be responsible for what I'm supposed to be responsible for and take care of those things. And so if by ordinance, which is, I guess, the law for this, and it's me, then, then I want to be able to take care of open space and do the things that needed to be done with it. However, if it does lie with her, let's just make the change in here, the appropriate language that spells that out, that it belongs in that particular department. So I'm not staking claim to anything. I just don't want to be caught not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Right.
No, that makes sense. And I appreciate that. And obviously we want to try to eliminate any ambiguity if we can, or incontinuity between the two.
So that's basically what this whole exercise was, is just to bring it to the 2021 and clear some things up and some language. There's some decent things that need to be changed and maybe some questionable things. Before we go any further, also, Elizabeth, just I wanted to open up to you if you had any comments or you wanted to insert anything at this point as well.
I don't think I have anything to add at this point. Just if there are questions, I'm here to answer if we're having a discussion about it. But I think that it was pretty comprehensive, so I'm good for that.
All right, Don?
Thank you. Just had a couple questions. My big concern is liability, especially in the parks. You know, the skateboard park, when we first put it up, I said, boy, that's an accident waiting to happen. I mean, when we first put it up, I think it was fenced in. We had somebody at the gate. They had to make sure everybody was wearing all their protective helmets and everything else. And now there's no gates, there's nobody checking. And then I get concerned about that. I get concerned about Mixville Park, where you know, there's no lifeguard and there's no signage. And I think if we're not going to have a lifeguard there should be signage at, you know, swimming at your own risk. I don't know how protective that is for our town or not. And lastly, you know, this is no watercraft, but there's been some confusion because I thought some people thought they could bring kayaks into Mixville. And I don't know if that's, they could or could not. And I think we should clarify that as well.
Paddle boards as well.
Yes. So, I mean,
So-
those are things I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about the liability and some of the things where people are kind of confused as to what can and can't be done at either, especially at Mixville, you know, even the sledding, you know, in the winter. You know, I mean, there's some crazy hills there, and I've seen some major accidents there. And how liable is the town if we're allowing that to happen too?
So I did have a conversation with Mark Wontroba from HD Seeger regarding some cases, claim history, signage that we already have there. There's a drain that probably should be covered, maybe some hay bales on either side of the hill. You know, if we took some steps to do that and the signage, the language was appropriate, and I could, you know, send some of that stuff over to Jeff for his review to get comment. You know, I didn't want to be coined the no fun police either and start taking away years of tradition. But maybe there's a way that we could still salvage that by, you know, putting in some of these measures that make it a safer thing. As far as the lifeguards, again, I did reach out to HD Seeger because that was a concern of mine. It's been a concern of Elizabeth's. You know, staffing's dwindled from there. She could talk about some of the history of why or where we were and where we are now with as far as lifeguards. I know last year we put big signs on the lifeguard shack that's on the beach on all four sides. It says no lifeguard on duty. There's signs in the parking lot. There's signs on the gatehouse when you first enter the park. So it is signed. It's not in another language. I don't know if we need to have it in another language because of the diversity of patrons that do show up there. Skateboard parks, they're kind of like basketball courts and tennis courts and things like that. I remember when there was a charge, there was a fee. That's why Mayor Dickinson never put one in Wallingford, because he wanted all those things in place. But as time has gone by, you know, there isn't staff there. It's not monitored. There's not even fencing there.
Well, I just look at old guys like us. I look at it and I break my arm. Really, I mean, but yeah, I mean, these kids are amazing on that. I've watched them. I just get concerned about some liability issues on that. But yeah, and I don't want to be, you know, getting rid of all the fun that the kids have. And I think it's important to make sure that we have these things available for kids and adults as well. So I just want to make sure that the town is protected on their side too.
I could look at the claim history in my 2 years. I think I've been called once on an accident that didn't go to a claim, but it was just more of someone was pointing something out. There was a wheel stop that was in the gravel lot where the high school students park, that's right near where the concession stand is, right adjacent to the skateboard park. And someone maybe over time, over the weekend, overnight, had just picked that thing up and placed it in there. And someone was going through with a bike, paying attention to what was going up on top of the handlebars, and then just flipped and went over. And so they were requesting that to be removed and taken out of there because it wasn't part of the original equipment that was placed there. Elizabeth, did you want to talk about some of the lifeguard history?
I don't know. We have to be done by 6:30, but lifeguards are obviously the gold standard. That's the best thing to do. Lifeguards are incredibly expensive. you would need to have at least 3 lifeguards there at all times. And one of the issues that we came up with as a question was weekend only lifeguards seems just as dangerous as no lifeguards at all, because then there's the uncertainty that people may have. Okay, which day of the week am I here? Are there lifeguards or are there not lifeguards? So it would really need to be a 7-day-a-week commitment, and it's a very large expense. Another challenge is that there is a critical shortage of lifeguards in the state of Connecticut. So it's not just somebody that you can pick off the street and train. They have to have certain skills, and they have to go through a training course. So it's a challenge there. I know that Sheila finds challenges, and she does a great job. She does get enough lifeguards, and there are always enough lifeguards at the pool. But we've tried to work collaboratively and make sure that we have enough lifeguards for both the pool and Mixville. And there were times when we did not have enough lifeguards to cover both of them, and the lifeguards would remain at the pool. And then Mixville, because it had at times been unguarded, was unguarded. So there are some challenges there. It's not, I don't think it's impossible, but it would definitely be a challenge.
What about like if the water testing, and if the water tests that it's unsafe, do we take any extra measures in making sure people aren't swimming there, or do we put caution tape around it, or I don't know. I mean, it's not like caution tape's going to stop somebody from going swimming, but
right.
If we, is there signage that goes up when it's unsafe?
There's signage that goes up at the gatehouse, and the Mixville Rangers would tell people as they're entering the park.
Okay.
A challenge that with the Mixville Rangers is they're not certified lifeguards, so the waterfront really can't be something that they're supervising. Because if they're enforcing some rules at the waterfront, then it becomes a question of, well, why aren't they just doing everything, and why aren't they supervising the water?
So if somebody goes in the water, they can't tell them to get out?
I think they could probably tell them to get out. That, I guess I would look for clarification, but I'm thinking of some of the other rules that exist at Mixville, like the inflatables that people like to bring in the pond that are definitely not allowed.
Yep.
Because there are also decisions that need to be made, and an understanding about what the right things to be allowed in the water are versus not. So they need to be trained on what Coast Guard approved flotation devices are then, because those are what's allowed. And that is typically something that a lifeguard has the knowledge of, not just anybody. And you can tell people things, but it just helps to have the lifeguard have that extra credential there. So I think we could tell people to get out of the water. I don't think that's an issue, especially now that we're going to be looking to have 2 of them there all the time. There would be somebody at the gatehouse and somebody who's allowed to rove the park. Prior to last year, it was always a single person, so their duty was just to watch the gate. Now we have more flexibility. It's a safer environment for the staff, and they can go around and tell people about some of the rules. So that will be a better thing.
Great, thank you.
All right, so they're not allowed in the water if there's no lifeguard.
No,
they're not supposed to be in the water.
No, I think what he's talking about is there's no swimming if there's a high bacteria count.
Oh, okay, right.
Or
okay.
Chespercott's testing. Gotcha.
But if someone goes in the water, absent that, they're okay to do that, but they just have to be aware of the fact that there is no lifeguard on duty.
Correct. And there are signs out there that say no lifeguard on duty. As John mentioned.
Okay. Peter, did you have anything you wanted to raise? Because I know obviously we're probably not going to have time to go through this ordinance sort of line by line and looking at it. I see the red things are new things, and yellow things are things that you're pointing out as topics of discussion, correct?
Yes.
Right. So maybe at some point in time, if because I think it's probably something that we may want to, this may be the source of a whole meeting unto itself, just to go through some of this stuff. So we may want to do that at some point in time, but I wanted to at least bring it up so we're having some discussion of it and refreshing people's recollection. But Peter, good.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I was just wondering if it was if there was an opportunity maybe that Jeff and I can go through this page by page at his discretion, at his time, so that we could clean some things up, so that I'm not proposing something that's not defensible or legal. We get you a clean draft and a clean version, and then have that discussion and go from there.
Whether you or I had started to talk, we were going to say the exact same thing. So I think in the in the essence of time and everything else, I think the easiest thing is to have John and Jeff sit down. This way, John knows what, kind of language he wants. Jeff makes it reasonable, and then come back with a red line version for this group. And then we can go through, all the red lines and kind of, thumbs up, thumbs down, and go from there.
Right. I mean, I thought all the changes were I think were good starts. So I think that would be a great idea. Peter, it's almost like you're the liaison to that commission. It's amazing.
It's almost like that, isn't it?
That's amazing.
And to that point, Mr. Chair, I did want to publicly thank not only John and Elizabeth, but Chairman Duffy and all the commissioners for their work on this. I know they spent a good deal of time mulling over this and coming up with the version that we're seeing now. So thank you to them, and obviously publicly congratulating Dr. Duffy on his anniversary too.
40th anniversary. It's pretty impressive. Very nicely done. Well, yes, as a former Park and Rec commissioner, I am all in favor of what we can do to help better utilize the facilities as best as we can, and also make them more updated and clearer. So yes, obviously to the extent that whatever you need to do with Jeff and to get these things to a draft, please with all deliberate haste, feel free, and we will when it's ready, we will be more than happy and ready to work on this project with you to get these things adopted.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Don, Peter, anything else before we move to the last topic? All right, well, thank you very much, and we look forward to that. The last thing I wanted to bring up, John, Elizabeth, thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
you. Good night,
and is just the discussion of increasing the income limits for the veterans tax relief. Arnett, you and I had talked about this a little bit, and one of the things that we've talked about is we've talked about what we can do with the elderly tax credits, and trying to adjust what we can do for the veterans tax credits to make that more in line with what we're doing on the elderly side as well. So, Arnett, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the veterans tax exemption ordinance actually identified dollar amounts for the income limits, and it really hadn't been an issue because those limits were either comparable or higher than the limits for the elderly tax relief. What happened this past year is there was a slight change where one of these limits, this income limit, was a little less than what the council adopted for the elderly tax relief. So because council wants to be able to offer the maximum exemptions, we would need to amend this ordinance to increase that income limit. And years ago, the council was given the ability to change the income limits for the elderly tax relief by resolution. So as Mr. Veliver said, if we can simply mimic that process for the veterans tax exemptions, then when we do the annual resolution for the elderly tax credits and the freeze, we would add the veterans tax exemptions to that resolution and establish the income levels on an annual basis without having to go through an ordinance amendment every year. That was longer than I meant, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Well, I thank you for that discussion. And so, I mean, obviously want to see whether, the rest of the, how we want to address that. But I mean, I think that's probably not a bad idea for us to be able to do. And so Don or Peter, do you have any thoughts on that one?
I think that's the most practical way to do it. I think it makes sense, and the veterans deserve it. So I think we should do whatever we can to make sure that gets done.
Right. Peter, is that good? Arnett, any other question? If we were to bring those limits up to what we currently have for the elderly, we're not talking a significant amount, right? I mean, it's only because the elderly changed a little bit. They're just So it's technically they're above them, but not by like a significant.
No,
amount.
it's tens of dollars, but it will
We wanna
progress. We want to
right.
start, get it in on the ground floor, but it does
Right.
not, it's not a significant change right now. And in terms of the cost to the town, I don't have the cost in front of me, but it was less than $300.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say, I know we looked at it previously and it's minimal.
Yeah.
Right. That's right. That's my thought. I just want, just for the record, I just want also people to understand when we're talking about this, it's not like everyone's going to suddenly get like $10,000 off their taxes. I mean,
No.
or it's going to be a huge adjustment, but we want to make them consistent, and so that we can say that we're giving them the best that we can do for those limits. So is that something, Arnett, that we could put together as a resolution for this committee to adopt at some point in time, at a meeting? How did we do it with the elderly as far as that, or did it just go? Did it,
Yeah.
from an adoption standpoint, if we wanted to move that forward to the council, what would we put together? What would we accept and then forward to the council?
Sure. There was a red line in just a first draft in your packet. I think the first step would be to check with Attorney D'Onofrio and make sure that we're doing that the language is correct, and it's doing what we want it to do. I would say at that point, you guys will get to go through it one more time, and at your next meeting, you can take a motion to forward it to the council. At that point, the council would then have to set a public hearing, because this is an ordinance amendment.
Right.
The council would set a public hearing, hold the public hearing, and then you would adopt this ordinance. From that point on, it can be handled by resolution. So it's going to take a few months, but
that's perfect. So yeah, so I guess if we can start that process, obviously I think all three of us are in line with that idea. So if we could start that process as far as getting it into whatever final draft it needs to be to. So, and we would go from, and then we can take that up at the next meeting as something that we could hopefully finalize and agree on and pass that on to the full council.
sounds like a good plan.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Don, Peter, anything else? I figure I'd spare you 12 minutes to make a run for food before for the budget meeting. And absent that, Attorney D'Onofrio, thank you for all of your help on this one. And Arnett, thank you as well. And with that, I will look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries.